All right, so I'll just do a quick intro. For anybody that doesn't know me, I'm Daniel Warlow, work for Campari America. I am a proud member of the Italian portfolio family. I get to talk about all the nerdy, geeky, bitter stuff. Currently today, we're using one of my favorite products, Cynar. Cynar has been around since 1952. Thank you for the bottle hold. Cynar is a really, really fun product for a multitude of reasons. My favorite thing to say about it, which it's going to get me in trouble at some point, but I don't really care. I'm going to keep doing it. If you can name one cocktail that if you add Cynar to it, it becomes a bad cocktail, I will give you $100 in cash. There is literally a multitude of ways to use this product. It's really amazing. The level of bitterness, the sweetness, it's perfectly combined. And today we're going to learn about adjusted acids and all sorts of geeky stuff from Luis. So Luis Hernandez, thank you so much for putting this all together. I know a lot of work goes into this stuff. A lot of your time was taken, so I really, really appreciate that. I appreciate your time and your attention to this. So I'm going to hand it over to Luis. I'm going to keep control of the questions. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in. I'll ask Luis if we go along, if it's pertinent in the moment. If not, save it to the end. If you have any questions about Cynar, feel free to save it to the end, and I can address those as well. But I'm going to hand it over to you, Luis. Thanks, man.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know me out there, my name is Luis Hernandez. I have a company called Cocktail Illustrators. So we right now, obviously changing with the times, doing a lot of online trainings and things like that. I've stopped for the last month because of the situation, but got a lot of really cool educational stuff, and so things like this were right up my alley to keep going and do some stuff. So thank you to Campari, and thank you to Portland Cocktail Week for hosting me on this. This is I was just telling Dan, it's something I've taught this class now. This is going to be my third time that I've taught this class, and I'm actually really happy that a lot of the things that I taught the first time are pretty much obsolete to me at this point, because it's just the nature of the thing. And I think when you approach this class or any of the other classes that you'll see this week or in the weeks coming up, just kind of keep that in mind, that all these things are suggestions of things that are happening right now. But, I encourage you to do your own research, taste this stuff. Don't just be like, oh, Luis said that, so it's okay. This is a gateway for you to do your own thing, do your own research. There's so much research out there, and there's so much bad research that you kind of need to be aware of. So, and in looking at this, I'll tell you about a couple of things that I found that, where pH tables were actually flipped upside down. So, they really didn't make a lot of sense. This usually generates a lot of questions. So, like Daniel said, just throw them on the chat. I'm going to try to blast through this as quickly as possible because it generates a lot of questions. So, let me know what you got. I'm going to start by making myself a drink because I can. So what I did is I made a cucumber and celery soda. So just carbonated it into the SAE here. And if you can see, I'll pour it here so you can see a little bit better. So I'm going to build this backwards, but you can see that color. I made this a week ago. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about is preservation. I'm going to talk to you about the exact preservative that I use for this, but celery and cucumber hasn't gone bad at all, and it still tastes fresh, crisp, and really delicious. So if you'll indulge
can I ask you a question, Luis?
Yeah.
The cucumber and the celery, this was fresh vegetables that you blended. How did you get it into the soda?
Yeah, so I just blended them in, little water and sodium metabisulfite, which is one of the things that we're going to get into as a preservative, and a little bit of sugar. And then I just carbonated it this morning, and that's it. So for those of you who don't know, even though Daniel challenged everybody to try to come up with something that goes bad with Cynar, cucumber and celery are absolutely amazing with artichokes. So, you see what. Awesome. So let's get down to the presentation. Oh, nice. Baby. All right. So you got all my info there. It's going to be at the end as well. YouTube channel, my website, all that stuff. So you'll be able to get some of the stuff on there. So just, let me know. Okay, I just figured that was fun. Cool. So
Man.
one thing I want to go over is just to really understand that nearly all ingredients, all foods, vegetables, even grains, beans, things like that, they're all going to have a certain amount of acids and a certain amount of sugars as well. Usually they can be in parts of carbohydrates that then need to be processed to be changed into sugar. Think of the way that we make whiskey, or how we need to kind of cook the cereal in order to make it pop out to extract the sugars. But you have sugar, you have acids in pretty much everything. So if you can see here, and I know for those of you who are on Facebook or on your phone, it might be a little difficult, but you can see the different ways in which there are acids. And the one thing I want you to take away from this is the fact that coffee actually has a much more complex palette of acids than things like lemon do that we automatically associate with being acidic. Coffee is actually much more complex, much more varied. And this is something that I want you to take away for when you're looking at this, things that you can do for your own cocktails is that adding a complexity of either sugars or spirits or acids in this case, it's really going to give you a much rounder taste. Lemon is going to be very rich in tartaric, malic, and citric acid. It also has a good amount of ascorbic acid, which is extracted from vitamin C. And those are going to be very sharp, very bright, as opposed to coffee that has pyruvic, it has quinic, which tend to be a little bit more like muted, earthy in their sense. And a good way to kind of go about this is in a test test. If you can take a bunch of acids, mix them in with water, and just taste them, you'll really understand where they come from. Malic is going to be, a little bit. It's going to have a little bit of tartness. It has that kind of feel that you can feel in your teeth, like when you bite into a very green apple or a Granny Smith or something like that. Really gives you that sort of sense of a bite, and that's something that it translates. Lactic acid creates roundness, which is the body of milk, heavy cream, that kind of stuff. So really take the time to figure out where these acids come from, how they can be used, and how you can put them into your own concept. So the other thing, as I keep saying the word acid, is that I kind of don't want to use the word acid too much, but we really want to treat this as a spectrum. So this is the pH scale. This is a very small version of the pH scale, and this is what I was talking about earlier. I have found the worst pH scales ever looking through Google that made no sense whatsoever. So really be careful that you're actually figuring it out. Lemon tends to be between 2.5 to 3.5 in its acid content. But as you can see, everything is basically put together in here. So you can do litmus tests. Having litmus paper is something that I carry on my bar kit in case I need to make something on the fly. And you can really figure out the pH level of things. Because what you find is that substituting doesn't just mean having the correct amount of acid, having the correct amount of sugar and body is important as well. But for example, most vinegars are going to be a 2.5, just like a lemon would. So 2.5 to 3, they're going to be around the same. So theoretically speaking, you can substitute vinegars for something like a lemon or a lime, but you have to keep in mind the flavor and the type of acidity. So acetic acid versus citric acid, which are going to be the two dominants, citric for lemon and acetic. Acetic is very, very, very sharp, very aromatic. So it's going to cut, even though they're on the same size of the pH, it's going to cut. So you can enhance something like a vinegar by turning it into a shrub, for example, or even within a shrub, adding things like lactic acid are going to help round it out a little bit, or adding a little bit of water is going to help take it down. So if you can see, water is 7 here. That's going to take away a little bit of the acid, which means that you can substitute for something like lemon as well and kind of put those two together. So just keep in mind the flavor profiles.
Can I ask you one quick question?
Yes.
You mentioned shrubs. This is something that, I mean, nobody's asking this question, but it's something that I personally have a question about. I can't tell you how many times I've had a cocktail where somebody, they advertise they have a shrub in a cocktail, and then they add additional acids, lemons, limes, whatever to it. It's a lot about balance, right? And especially when you're creating a shrub, you're really trying to create something that is a single note that takes the place of other acids. And sometimes adding other acids to it can either take away from it or kind of set it off balance, if you will.
It can, and one of the things that I think we need to be aware of is the fact that acids mutate other acids. There are dominant acids. Acidic is really, really dominant over pretty much everything else.
Yep.
So if you're using something like a lemon and you want to make it into a shrub, you'll get the flavor of the lemon, but the acetic acid is going to be the one leading the way, even though you do have some citric acid. But that comes more to a sense of your body will know it's there, or your taste buds will know it's there. So the way that these acids affect you, affect your health and your body is something very, very important. As you can see, gastric acid is not that far from being with the lemon and lime, and that's why if you have lemon or limes or any citrus fruit on an empty stomach, it usually gives people like acid reflux and things like that. It's because the citric acid is going to basically ramp up. It's a superior acid. It's going to take it in, and then it's going to turn into you basically having a live acid in your stomach that's eating nothing except just ramping up more acid. So something to keep in mind is very much when you're using this stuff, it's what's superior to what. And understanding that if you use tomato juice in a Bloody Mary and you add lemon juice, there is tartaric and malic acid already in the tomato, and there's going to be tartaric and malic acid already in the lemon juice. That's going to ramp up. So very easy to lose control of it and just have something wildly acidic. The point of this table is for you when you choose something, pH strips are super cheap. I mean, you can buy one for like $2-3. That will probably last you a month. That's if you're using it a lot. But the point is for you to really see where this lies on the pH scale, and by doing that, you'll be able to sort of get a sense of, okay, if I add lemon, tomato, and then coffee to a cocktail, this is now going to be very, very strong and probably a terrible cocktail, to be honest. But but the acid is going to ramp up to something really, really insane, and you don't want to muddle them up. You want them to be bright. You want them to have their levels, but just understand that some of them are going to be stronger than others. So one thing I want to talk about is sourcing. So this is going to be up on my website after this. I'm not going to promise it's going to be directly after this, but today it will be there because I'm sure everybody's going to have questions after. What I did here is I took this. It's like 450 different ingredients. Their pH range is set, and everything that's on highlighted in yellow is at a level where it can compete with lemon and lime. So I should give you a really good idea where you can use cherries in a substitution for lemon and lime, or you can use cherries, a cherry juice that's fresh, and then add a 1/4 ounce of lemon as opposed to adding 3/4 ounce of lemon. So alternative acids don't mean that you don't have to use lemon and lime and grapefruit orange anymore. It can be an additive to it, and you can see the way your cost changes. If you're going through too much lemon, you can substitute it with something else that maybe they have in the kitchen, or an ingredient that you want to be much more prominent than you would want a citrus to be. So if you want the acid to come through cherries, the flavor of cherry is going to come through a lot more. You're going to have a much different cocktail than you would if you're doing more lemon in this. But you'll have access to this so that you can actually try it out on your own. The part on the bottom here is one that I found interesting and took a lot of research. These are basically different juices you can buy, and they all have a different pH, even though they all probably come from the same Florida oranges. But because they are acid adjusting things to make whatever it is that their signature flavor is, it's going to give you a different thing. So just buying something, this is something important for competitions. If you're putting something together and you say, I want to use this particular brands, and you don't put that on the thing, somebody can get a different brand, get a different cocktail that's too sweet or too tart, and it can mess up what your vision actually is. So just because it's a juice, don't assume that they're just juicing oranges and putting it away. There's probably ascorbic acid and tartaric acid. They're usually using sodium metabisulfite and a couple of different things that are going to affect the way that the juices go. So keep in mind that the juices, everything is going to be different. Everybody handles it in a different way. So
I think Don Lee gave the best example when he was teaching a mini class about acids, especially talking about difference between lemon and lime, and then also when dealing with clarifying citrus, frozen fruit, especially for companies like Dole, it's going to be all the same. They literally have to find a way to make it as close as possible because they have nutritional facts on the back. It has to be as close to that as possible. So, I mean, you have to think about it. If you want the same thing every single time, if you want to be able to make that happen, that's their entire job.
Yeah, and I mean that's you kind of have to think like those big companies that they're gonna take this oranges that they work with the farmers, they test them on the vine to see what their sugar levels and their acid levels are. Then they're going to juice them as quickly as possible. Depending on their extraction level, they're gonna have to do a litmus test on it to figure out if where it is and how they need to adjust it because they need to give out the same product every single time. And that's something that I think as bartenders we sometimes don't do. That you put cherries, if you have cherries in August and you have cherries in January, they're going to be different. And
Yep.
simply doing 300 grams of cherries and 300 grams of sugar, that's not going to cut it because you actually need to test it. So it's going to affect the way that the drink goes. And this is especially if you're doing bottled cocktails, if you're doing cocktails on draft. Carbonation is something that really ramps up acid. And you're going to have to deal with that. And that's why some cocktails sometimes go a little bit offline because people are not paying attention to the acid and the sugar levels in it. So
Yep.
something that's very important.
Luis, we got a question that came in. I'll read it off to you. I saw a bunch of bases were cleaning solution kind of things. When you have several types of acids, such as coffee and lemon, how do you balance that back out? And are there cocktail ingredients that are higher in pH to counter acidity?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, you kind of have to think of it in a more scientific term. This would be acid effects can affect like bones, teeth, things like that, hair. Bases affect skin, muscle, things like that. So definitely once you get up in the 9 and 10s on this list, you don't want anything to do with them. Ironically enough, if you take something like bleach and you add lemon juice to it, it will bring the pH down to 7. You'll still die, because it's basically chemicals. But as far as being an acid or a base, it will neutralize itself, and you'll still be able.
Just real quick, so still don't drink bleach, everybody.
Do not drink bleach. Don't inject it either. But the best way to do anything that you need to dilute is going to be water. Water is in the middle. It's going to be a thing that if you need to bring the pH up or down, water is going to be your friend. It's the most abundant thing for us. If you are looking to adjust something, let's say you want something to be more you want lemon juice to be more alkaline than it is acidic, add some water to it. Try to get water that is distilled water, because the water that we get from the tap has its own added minerals to it that, I can't even tell you what it will do, because depending on where you're from, it might be different. So distilled water, definitely going to be the way to go for that. Eggs is something that sometimes companies use. So egg whites is something that they use to add to things and basically sort of grab some of the minerals and acids and extract them off, because it's such a tight thing that's easy to pull through a strainer. So that can work.
They use it for clarification, for filtration when you're trying to ship something out. It's the same thing as chill filtration.
And usually it's going to be powdered egg whites, which makes it a lot easier. But so keep in mind that as I'm saying that, try to make your stuff, balanced and that kind of stuff, is don't go too crazy on this. At the end of the day, the plan is for us to make a delicious cocktail. And if people are enjoying it, then get out of your own way. Forget that I said anything and just walk away. If you're planning on doing something insane like I did, that I'm about to get into right now, which is create an entire cocktail menu without acid, then we can get into something a little bit nerdier like this, but I think for me, what I look for in a bar is consistency. So, if you can create the channels where people are, using um, a refractometer to figure out the levels of sugar, to make sure that everything's on par, you'll basically be able to get, a much more level thing. And sugar is going to be the biggest thing here. Acid is a lot harder to control because of flavor. But sugar, we add or subtract as much as we need or don't need. So as I was saying, one of the things that I did was I created a menu without citrus. And to me, that was just a thing that I don't know why I wanted to do it. I'm a bit of a masochist. So I just thought that it would be a really fun challenge to do something like that, and sort of start creating. So this cocktail that I came up with here was the very first thing that kicked off the whole thing and kind of taught me a lot of lessons. So these are a few things that you will run into once you start developing cocktails with alternative acids, which is the classics are gone. They don't exist anymore to you. They're never going to happen because you can't make a daiquiri. You can't make, anything. Like you just can't. Most cocktails are going to have citrus. If you think of an old fashioned, it has a twist on top. So you can no longer create in those terms. So you have to figure out, how do I create different things? How do I create this cocktails that are going to be something that I've never learned before? And that's when your palate is going to come up. That's when it's going to be a thing where your history, where what you've eaten, the places that you've seen, that's going to come up. And to me, that's the moment where I realized, great, these cocktails are my thing. This is how I make drinks now. And there's nobody else on the planet that is making these cocktails. And having that sense really helped me out in my career, because I knew that there was something that only I could do because it was my palate and nobody else's. So this cocktail here was actually ended up being a stirred cocktail. But as a general rule is, you do a cocktail that is, if it has juices, you shake. If it doesn't, you stir. That's kind of what we are taught. Well, this didn't have any juices, but I wasn't sure if I was supposed to shake it or not. So when I shook it, it was awful. And to figure out, we had to stir it. So again, might be a very minimal thing, but something that automatically, you make something with only spirits, you're going to stir it. This wasn't it. So we had to really figure out the way to do it. So one thing that I found out is that fermentation was a great way to extract acids, because fermentation goes after sugar. And that makes it very easy to basically guide it to take the sugars of the things that you actually need to take out. And it keeps only the acid, because fermentation can't do anything to acid. So this is fermented roses. So took the rose petals, those green lines that you see there, those are pineapple fronds that we're utilizing by stripping the Brettanomyces off of them, putting them in there so that the yeast could react. There's water and a little bit of honey in there just to kind of start the process. But then inevitably it would run out of food and it would start going after the roses. Start breaking down the roses, taking the sugar off of them, and then leaving something that was a little bit funky. There's not a lot of acid in the roses, but for me, it was more about getting the aroma and the fragrance. And then we acid adjusted this a little bit. What I found after that was that it wasn't a 2 3/4 3/4. It couldn't be anymore. So those specs were out the window. I needed to do whey because I needed the roundness to be a little bit better. So we extracted some whey. We gave the curds to the kitchen. They created a whole dish with it. And then we were able to keep the whey in order to add a little bit more texture to it. And then citric acid, which just ramped it up a little bit. We sort of discovered that there was a lot of citric acid in roses. And as soon as we put a couple of drops, it just ramped up. So you have 3 different types of acid. Namely, you have 2 different types of lactic from the fermentation, one from the whey, and then citric acid that are ramping up this thing and actually making it a viable product that you can drink. That makes it a lot interesting. So looking at this cocktail is when I realized, okay, lemon is nice, but I'm not God. Lemon is a natural thing, and I can't create something that perfect and round that has texture, acid, sugar. So I need to create my own. And that's when I sort of came around for making these 3 things together. So at the end of the day, we fused them all together, and we just had this whey rose syrup with citric acid in it. And that made it a lot easier to use, so we don't end up with a 10-bottle pickup.
Do you know the exact types of acid that came from the roses, or is that something that's hard to?
It's hard to
figure
find
out?
because nobody uses roses for anything really.
Yep.
Mostly they're extracted for their aroma, but as far as an
Yep.
ingredient, it's very, very rare. Some places in the Middle East will use it for desserts, but it's just not something that's very, it doesn't seem worth it for a lot of people to do that. But I know that they're rich in citric acid and tartaric acid. That's pretty much the only thing that I was able to figure out.
Got it.
But next one here, very easy. And I'm gonna blast through these. That one was just kind of set up, but this one was very easy because it's just a pickling. It's a lactic pickling, so basically just water, salt, and sugar, and just letting it go into the cuca melons. If you don't know, those little melons kind of look like tiny watermelons. They come from Mexico, and really delicious. We basically wanted to make a like a pickleback, but in a stirred version. So we did the whiskey. We did notes from the whiskey that we took down, and we added those ingredients to the pickling liquid so it could match really well. But then the pickling liquid just became the acid. We were able to clarify it, and you have a nice clear cocktail that was really easy to sip. Because we did the fermentation ourselves, we were able to cut it off before it became a true vinegar, and thus it wasn't super, super sharp. The acetic acid was present. The lactic acid was the most present, and that's what we wanted, was to not have something that was just a vinegar over the top, kind of ruining the whole thing.
Can I ask, I've got a question here that just came in, and it's kind of pertinent, especially to vinegar. I want to use Shrubs as a substitute for citrus juice, but I'm not a big fan of vinegar taste. Any suggestions or I'm guessing on what will tame that particular flavor?
So the thing about it is that when you look at any recipe for cocktail food or something like a shrub, you're gonna have to keep in mind the things that you like, the things that you don't like, and understand what their point is. So shrubs were originally made so that you could preserve the nutritious quality of berries and orchard fruits and things like that for the winter. So because there was no refrigeration, you would add vinegar to it, a little bit of honey, and then basically just let it sit there, and it would turn into this like vinegary thing that you would use. This happened over the course of months. We don't have that kind of time. So it was something that would change from acetic acid to mostly lactic, acetic, and malic acid. It would be much rounder, much friendlier. But again, we're talking about putting away fruits for months. When you're doing a shrub, you have to understand that it doesn't have to be so black and white anymore, where if it says 250 grams of vinegar and 250 grams of cherries or whatever, you can use 100 grams of vinegar and then substitute the rest with lemon juice. So you can balance it out to whatever your preferences are, because as long as you keep in the spirit of it in, it's gonna work. And like I said before, acetic acid is gonna go and take over citric acid, but it's kind of like if you put a little bit of salt into a liter of water, it's not gonna do anything to it because it's too little. So if you have 100 grams of vinegar and you add more than double of that of lemon juice or orange or anything like that, it's not going to matter. It's going to mutate a little bit, but it won't give you that overwhelming sense of vinegar that goes up your nose that kind of gets in your face like that. So you can just tailor things to however you want it to be, which is why sometimes when I show people recipes, they look at a 4-to-1 or a 5-to-1 syrup and they're like, what the hell is this? And well, it's what works. So most of the time we get too wrapped up on, is it a 2-to-1 instead of 1-to-1, because those are the basics. But I think for anybody who's looking at this presentation, the basics are out the window if you're talking about shrubs. You need to kind of go into what works and not so much about what's traditional, which is, again, how I got to this menu. So this one right here was a fun one because I basically got to create a cocktail that looked sweet on paper, but wasn't at all. And the way that we did that was to create a coffee cocktail. It had cream, whiskey, ancho reyes, and a little bit of maple syrup. And what we did was we used the coffee as the acid. Same technique as before. We needed to extract more sugar from it, so we did a cold brew with pineapples. So we used the pineapple skins to add to the cold brew. We would let it ferment all the way through. It would get really funky and really bright and acidic. And so you had a really balanced cocktail over here that normally you wouldn't want to add lemon or lime to coffee because it tastes pretty terrible. So instead, we just substituted that. So this was at 2.2%, 2.2 on the pH scale. So it was a little lower than lemon juice or lime juice would be. But the reason for that was because it's not as complex. So I needed to add less of it to make it work. So this was a half ounce of this as opposed to a more traditional 3/4 ounce you would use.
Luis, we got another question that came in. I think this definitely has to do a little bit with the last slide. Are there problems with salt getting in the way in the resulting cocktail when using lacto fermented pickles? And are you using a 5% salt solution?
Yes and no. I usually use a 30% salt solution, which is pretty much saturated all the way through. And I use that for all my cocktails. Even if I have something like Himalayan, they're all 30%. I am the biggest advocate of salt in cocktails ever, so there's nothing that's going to go wrong with this. But you do have to recognize that if you've been making daiquiris with a dash of salt, that's one thing. It's not going to damage this, but it is going to react in a different way because salt is an enhancer, and you need to see what it's going to enhance. So if it's enhancing the funkiness and that's what you want, great. If it's enhancing the coffee flavor and that's what you want, great. So it's just going to be a more trial and error thing, because if you're doing this exact same drink in your house, it's going to be different because the yeast around in your house is going to be different. The temperature is going to be different. So it's going to ferment at a different rate, and all that matters. So when you're doing this stuff, getting consistency is going to depend on having a refractometer, a hydrometer, having pH strips that you can test the stuff out. So it takes a lot more work in order to do it. But, getting something unique is important. But salt will not affect any of this stuff. Put it on everything. There's salt in here. This thing has salt. It's great. So don't worry about that.
Yep.
This next one was actually one of my favorite ones that I found out.
Oh.
So these are termites that come from Thailand. And so what happens with these termites is that apparently during the beginning of the season, after the rains are done, the termites kind of seal themselves during the rain season. And then after, they have this new termites that are born in the colony that have only been eating this pulp that kind of ferments inside. So they take the wood pulp, they take it back, and they basically add spit to it, and it ferments. So it becomes very acidic. So this larva have only been eating this, and they're the first ones that go out scouting. And they have wings at the beginning. So the scouter termites, I know it sounds terrifying, but they have wings.
Yes.
And because they've only had this acidic sort of juice and pulp, they're very acidic themselves. And they have this really cool kind of lemongrass, gingery flavor to them. There's also some ants in Mexico that have the same type of thing. And the ones in Mexico have to do with their diet. The things that they eat are very acidic, so they are very acidic. But if you bit into one of them, you could swear it was lemongrass. It's super interesting, but they're so acidic. So for me, when I was creating a stirred cocktail, was the question of, okay, I can't do a twist on top. I can't add anything that I traditionally would. What can I do? So we made a syrup, we added it to the cocktail itself, and then we made a half a rim of the toasted ones. So we toasted them in the oven, we crushed them into a little bit of a powder, and we put them around the rim. And it was a fun thing because we gave you half a cocktail where you don't have to drink them, but you would get the aroma over the top of the lemongrass and ginger and the bright lemony notes. Or you could take a sip of them and it would hit you, and they were bright and really cool. And it was a fun conversation piece. So also pretty much get used to this because bugs are going to be the future at some point.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. This was probably the one that almost caused my team to kill me. because I got it into my idea. I'm like, if we're going to do this, we have to make a sour. We have to make an egg white sour with no sour. And so the search started on what is so sour out there, or what is so similar to a lemon or lime that we can use. We found out nopales are huge in malic acid, huge on citric acid. And so we added citric acid, we chopped them up, added them to a bath of malic acid, and then we just let them sit there for about 30 minutes, and then we juiced it. So it mutated the acids inside, made it very bright, very acidic, and it would made a Magnolia shrub. So Magnolia is really big in the South, very aromatic, kind of similar to what we did with the roast, except we just made this into a shrub. If you're from, like South Carolina, like old school back there, there's, probably heard about something like this before. So we had acetic acid and malic acid that we were using in this, and it turned out to be perfect. We got to make our sour. So this was tequila, it had agave, it was a peach and magnolia shrub, and then the juice from the nopales, a little bit of salt. And then all these flowers on top of here are actually acidic flowers that we put together. There's cornflowers, safflower, and I'm blanking out on the other one. But the point was to get it on the nose as well, to get that sort of bright, refreshing, acidic note on top, and that's what we were able to do it with this one.
Dope.
So
That sounds delicious.
if you can see so far, the kind of idea was to, originally I thought, okay, we're going to put citric acid on this cocktail, we're going to put lactic acid on this cocktail, and that's not how things turned out at all. And we needed to find different ways of incorporating it, whether it was mutating through acidification, which literally is a bath that you're putting this stuff in and letting them sit before you juice them, or using termites, anything like that we could get our hands on that had a different type of acid, made it really interesting, because then we're building around those ingredients, as opposed to we want to make a cocktail with whiskey or we want to make a cocktail with chinar. It was, we want to make a cocktail with the termites. How can we surround their flavor, their notes, their acidic qualities? How can we implement this? So, a couple of things on citrus itself, because it's not like I hate citrus. I just wanted to do that without it. But the way that we use citrus right now, I did a test at one point where for 6 months I weighed all the cases of lime that I got and juiced them and then weighed them after. Basically, we're using about 29% to 33% of a case if we are only juicing them. So in New York, at about $35 a case, you're losing almost $20 on every case if you're just juicing them and throwing them out. So yeah, that's crazy. So part of doing the alternative acids is what can you do with the acids you already have. These are very simple things. On the right here, you can see this is basically vinegar and peels, and you can use entire husks, add them to vinegar, and then you can use it as a cleaning agent. So regular white distilled vinegar, add orange, lemon, lime, grapefruit, whatever you want. And then you can add lavender if you like lavender in the bar. You can add that kind of stuff. Then you don't have to use 409 anymore. You don't have to use those heavy chemicals if you don't want. And my wife likes to add a little bit of soap in it, which is perfectly fine if you want it to just be a little bit, not be quite as corrosive because it's bad on wood. But if you mix it with water, a little bit of soap, then you have something that's stronger, has cleaning materials for disinfectant, even though the vinegar will do that as well, and it smells really good. So that's super easy to do. You really don't have to think. There's no formula for it. It's just how much vinegar do you want to add to this thing in order to cover it, and that's it. On the left is a regular oleosaccharum. If you can, it doesn't take that long to peel everything and make oleosaccharum out of. And the fun things that I have been doing with oleosaccharum is that I kind of completely forgot about making things that are a lemon sherbet after. So a sherbet would basically be taking the oleosaccharum and adding, the juice back into it. So if you're making a lemon one, you would add lemon juice back into it, and you end up with a syrup that's very aromatic and, bright and citrusy. But for me, it's actually been a lot more fun making this and adding other stuff to it. So think of a lemon one with an Earl Grey tea. So instead of You make the oleosaccharum, you add Earl Grey tea to it, and now you have an Earl Grey syrup that's aromatic and oily and really delicious. So you can go so many ways with this. And after you do this, again, you don't have to do so much sugar as long as it extracts it. So you can add things like different aromas. Cardamom is really great with this stuff. You can acidify it and use this as the thing that now has sugar, has different aromas, different textures, and then add more lactic acid, more malic acid, however you want to take it, and kind of push it that way. Other things to do are here on the right. If you know the guys from Trash Tiki who do a lot of this really cool stuff, it's basically a stock, which it's pretty funny because like whoever juices limes did a terrible job. There's so much lime left in there, but you know, whatever.
It's just as bad as leaving the sticker on your limes, man. Come on.
Yeah, like come on. And then the other two, salt and sugar. You'd be amazed if you take, you know, if you zest this and add it to some salt and just give it to the kitchen and be like, hey, I got the salt for you guys. It's amazing. I mean, you can put it on chicken, on beef, or whatever you want. I don't care what type of kitchen you have. It could be a sushi place that you work at. You can add some of the stuff on top and it would absolutely change it. So something you can coordinate with your kitchen. You can also use this at the bar to rim glasses for different drinks, margaritas with citrus salt, really delicious, very easy to do. And sugar, I mean, that's just sugar. That's just, again, you can use it to caramelize things like creme brulee over the top. So again, talk to your kitchen if you have one, or start, you know, messing around with it. That is the end of this particular thing. I know I told my friend Cameron that I was going to talk about some of the stuff that I used to do before. So when it comes down to preservatives, that is the main part of me using alternative acids as far as in their powder form. So these acids are extracted through a chemical process. They're extracted from actual fruits, but you need to be careful now because citric acid is also very dominant in corn. And so GMO corn is becoming a big thing that people are extracting citric acid from. So when you're looking at companies that you're getting the stuff from, be careful because people will find any way to save any money, and corn is cheaper than getting lemons and limes to extract that from. So be careful with that. It's not good to use a lot of it, which is why I used to do a clear lemon and clear lime that was basically a compound of acids mixed together. But I've since stepped away from it, not because of any health reasons that I've had or anybody that I've known, but just because it's just not good for your body to intake so much concentrated acid in one point. So I generally don't like to do that anymore. As far as preservatives, when it comes to alternative acids, there was a question about ascorbic versus sodium metabisulfite. Sodium metabisulfite is completely synthetic, but it is the best thing that I've ever used. And that's exactly how I make this over here. This, for anybody who's worked with me, I make celery syrup and it lasts 2-3 months. It will go bad, like actually ferment and go bad before it will actually turn brown. And even then, it takes about 6 months for it to start fermenting in the fridge. So you can really add some longevity to your stuff by using sodium metabisulfite. Very important that you use the food grade version because there are two. The non-food grade version is meant to kill weeds. I promise you, you don't want to drink that. And then the food grade one is very strong, so you need to use 0.1% of the volume, of the weight of the thing that you're using. So if you juice some celery and you have 100 grams of celery, you need to use 0.1% of that. That's it. Not when you make it into a syrup and now you have 200 grams of it. It's just when it's juiced. So very easy to use. Don't worry too much about it, but just be careful with that. Ascorbic acid is something, it's a type of acid. It's kind of unique because it's actually extracted from vitamin C. So it has a really interesting tart quality to it that is not so much citrus or anything. It's just on a class of its own. It can be used as a preservative, but it's just nowhere near as good. And I try to minimize the amount of preservatives that I use in the drinks that I'm putting out there. So sodium metabisulfite at 0.1% is very easy to use. It won't damage anything. And I think it's just superior. Ascorbic, use it for more flavor than you would as a preservative.
We've got a question that came through. If you add fresh zest to your salt, it changes its lifetime, right? Saying this because it's hydrated.
Yes and no. So you basically need to let it dry. So if you cover it in a jar, you're now creating an environment where, it has moisture and it's trapped. And so it can get a little funky. But all you need to do is just make it and then just let it dry. You can put it on top of parchment paper for a couple of hours and it'll dehydrate, or you can put it into a dehydrator and it'll take 10 to 15 minutes and it'll be ready to go and then you're good to go. So you need to extract the moisture out. I particularly like to leave it in a jar and then overnight and then dehydrate it after, because then I'm ensuring to extract as much of the oil as I possibly can and get the flavor, which is what I want in the first place.
That makes sense. Dope.
So
All right.
as far as basically, again, like the things that I want you guys to take away from this is, I'm sorry if I went too fast, but I could literally talk about this for like 10 hours. And I was trying to cover a wider base on this, but you want to be careful in the way that you're using acids. You want to really figure out how they react with other acids. And the reason why I'm not telling you this is because, like you saw in that chart that I showed before, you could have two cherries that grow in different places that have different types of acids that dominate them. So I don't want to tell you that citric acid is going to dominate a cherry when it might be malic acid that's more rampant in it, or it might be tartaric acid that's bigger in one particular one. So soil plays a part in this on how things grow. So it's not necessarily like every cherry is going to react the same way to every acid. So you really need to figure it out. Figure out the pH. Once you get the pH down, you can mutate the acid. It won't change too much on the pH. It's actually a little bit difficult in large batches, but you'd be amazed the amount that a teaspoon can do to a liter of cherry juice. That can change it completely. And that might be enough for you to do what you need to do.
And then one more question came in. They just want to make sure that it's the same thing. Sodium bisulfate is what you're referring to? I'm sorry?
It's sodium metabisulfite.
Metabisulfite.
You can find it on Amazon. Make sure you're getting the food grade. Can't say that enough.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and you can get it's pretty cheap, and especially by the amounts that you're going to be using it, you're not going to run out of it anytime soon. It's important to keep an eye out to like when you do research on a specific acid, what else is it used for? And that's how I came around with the whole sodium metabisulfite, how I found the other one. The citric acid is used in pharmaceuticals. It's used in tartaric and malic and quinic. Pretty much all the acids are used in face creams. They tighten your skin because they're so astringent. They're used in cleaning materials. Citric acid is really good for if you talk to people at distilleries, they might be washing their fermenters with citric acid. So in large doses, it can do a lot. So keep that in mind when you're using things. If you want to play around with the way they react within cocktails themselves, doing a solution, a 10% solution, and then keeping them in a vial and adding it to drops, adding a drop or two into a cocktail is generally a good way to make sure that everybody's using the same amount when you're making the stuff. So it doesn't have to be that you have to acidify things ahead of time, that you have to ferment anything. It can be as simple as that, as just simply having malic, tartaric, quinic, citric, all the stuff in vials, 10%, and then just add a drop and see how it goes. That's a pretty safe way to kind of get into this world. And it's something that, if you're a chef and you're watching this, or if you like to cook and you're watching this, it can be interesting. I mean, one of the things that make something like tagine so delicious, there's no lime in there. It's citric acid, so you can have some of it, but it's very strong, and that helps tenderize meat when you actually add it to beef to season it, or chicken. So you can add citric acid with other stuff. You can add it into marinades, and it'll help you break down different things here and there. So it has multiple uses rather than just being an acid. For our purposes, that's what we're going to use it for, but you can do so much with it. And if you're marinating, let's say, salmon, like I actually just did. So salmon, you can add citric acid and orange. Orange is what I like to call a perfect citrus, because it has it has less amount of acid, less pH, and more sugar, which is why it generally makes it bad for cocktails, because it doesn't help one way or the other. It's very,
Oh man,
round.
we could have a whole separate conversation about orange and cocktails.
That could be, yeah, that could be a war right there. But it's one of those things where it doesn't add too much besides its flavor.
Yep.
So I don't like to use it because of that. But if you use that, add citric acid to it. Now you're skipping adding lemon and lime if you don't want that flavor into something, and you're making a sort of ceviche out of it. So that's going to acidify. It's going to cook it because of the citric acid. It's going to cook it, but it's going to be only the flavor of that. So what I did was I cured some salmon with that, with annatto, and then just let it sit there. And then I used that juice to make myself a drink. So I threw it into a michelada. That's, ways in which the kitchen and the bar can interact, where it doesn't have to be pickling. It can be a marinade, and then you have this, basically broth that you're taking from the salmon. Add that to a michelada, and I can tell you it was delicious. But, think outside the box. Like I said, I'm available for whatever you guys need. This is a much longer conversation than we are able to have right now. But, you can subscribe to my website. And in July, I'm going to start putting more educational stuff on there. I, took a break to yell at racists on Facebook for a while. And so I'm ready to start doing some positive stuff again that doesn't involve me yelling at people on Facebook and stuff out there. So, thank you, Campari. Thank you, Lush Life and Portland Cocktail Week.
Thank you, Luis. I really appreciate the work you put in, man. This is one of my favorite subjects. Anything having to do with acid fermentation, all that stuff. I love to geek out on it. I appreciate everything you put up. I'm honestly, man, a lot of info came from this, and I really hope everybody gets to benefit from it. And we had a conversation on the phone about this. People have been talking about this stuff for a long time. I think it's time people actually implement these things, put them in their programs, and start to use it. It's not only is it good for the environment, it also expands people's minds. It's interesting. It's something else to talk about besides the same stuff, So I appreciate you doing the work, man. Thank you.
Of course, anytime.
All right. Thanks, Portland Cocktail Week. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for giving us a platform to have this conversation and many other conversations. We're very happy to partner with you guys, and really appreciate your time and your efforts and all that. So thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining as well. Cheers.
And the live stream is out. Thank you guys so much.